The moment the water rose past his chest, Levi realized the land everyone called dead was about to take something else, unless he found what no one else was seeing. Cold water slammed against his ribs as he forced the pry bar under the submerged beam. The horse screamed behind him, rope snapping tight in someone's hands. Mud filled his mouth when he slipped, fingers scraping iron in the dark current. He adjusted once, just once, then pushed harder, like he already knew where it would break, or who would. Stay with this story. You're going to want to see what happens next. The land sat quiet at the edge of Red Ridge Valley, like it had been forgotten on purpose. By late summer of 1888, the grass had turned the color of old straw. Fence posts leaned at tired angles. The well out back wore a crooked pulley that hadn't moved in years. Folks in town said cattle used to drop there without warning, said the ground gave nothing and took what it could. Levi Brooks stood in the middle of it one morning before sunrise, boots planted in dust that didn't hold a print for long. He had a receipt folded in his shirt pocket, creased and smudged from being read too many times, paid in full. 40 acres and a broken house with one door that stuck in the heat. That was all his now. In town, they had watched him sign. Sheriff Dalton Reed leaned back in his chair outside the general store, hat tipped low, and said it plain enough for anyone passing by to hear. Place like that don't go empty for no reason. It swallows men. Levi didn't answer. He had folded the paper, nodded once, and walked out like he'd just bought a sack of nails. Now he worked. He set the first post before the light came up over the ridge, measured it by eye, drove it down with steady strikes, the sound carrying out across dry land where nothing answered back. By noon, sweat had cut lines through the dust on his neck. By evening, 3 lengths of fence stood where there had been none that morning. He ate standing up, bread gone stale, coffee poured from a dented tin cup he rinsed once and set back on the same crate each time. The well took longer. He hauled up the old rope. It cracked in his hands like dry twine. He replaced it with one he'd brought from town, looped it through the pulley, tested it once, twice. The bucket came up empty both times. Third pull, there was a sound. Not much, just enough to keep going. By the second week, smoke rose from the chimney in the mornings. By the third, the gate stood straight. Still, the land said nothing. People rode past on the ridge sometimes, didn't come down, just slowed enough to look. A man working alone where no one else had stayed. Levi kept at it. He mended a hinge on the barn door with a strip of iron he heated over a small forge he'd built from stones out back. He patched the roof with boards pulled from a fallen shed. Nights, he sat on the step with his boots still on, hat beside him, watching the last light slide off the hills. Most evenings, the only sound was wind moving through dry grass. The afternoon she came, the air had turned still. Levi was at the side fence driving staples into a new rail. He heard the horse before he saw it. Slow, even steps on packed dirt. Not the kind of pace someone uses when they're in a hurry. He didn't turn right away. Finished the strike, pressed the wire down. Then he looked up. She sat straight in the saddle. Dark coat, dust along the hem, gloves in her lap. The horse was a good one, well kept, calm, ears forward. She guided it through the open gate without asking. Up close, there was nothing uncertain about her. Not in the way she held the reins, not in the way she looked at the place, not like the others who passed by. Her eyes moved over the fence line, the patched roof, the well rope, as if she were taking note of what was there and what wasn't. Then she looked at him. Levi wiped his hand on his jeans, left a darker streak across the thigh. He didn't step closer. She slid down from the saddle, without rushing, boots touching ground like she knew exactly where she stood. Left the horse loose. It didn't move. For a second, neither of them spoke. A fly buzzed somewhere near the trough. The wind stayed quiet. She gave a small smile. Not wide, not practiced, just enough to soften the stillness. "May I come in?" Levi glanced once toward the house, the door still stuck at the top hinge. He hadn't fixed that yet. Then he looked back at her. "Door's open," he said. She nodded, like that was all she needed. When she passed him, her shoulder came close enough for him to catch the faint smell of coffee. Not fresh, more like it had been poured a while ago and carried with her. He watched her walk up the steps, one hand brushing the railing he'd set straight 2 days before. She paused at the doorway, touched the frame, then stepped inside without hesitation, like she'd already decided something. Levi stood where he was, hammer still in his hand. Out on the ridge, a rider slowed, then kept going. Inside the house, there was the soft sound of boots on wood, a quiet shift of air as the door moved on its crooked hinge. Levi drove one more staple into the fence, missed the first strike, hit it clean on the second. He didn't know her name, but the way she had looked at the land, like it wasn't finished being what it was, stayed with him longer than it should have. And for the first time since he'd stepped onto that dust, the place didn't feel entirely empty. Not quite. She came back 3 days later, same hour. Late afternoon, when the light turned soft and the shadows stretched long across the broken pasture. Levi was at the well, hauling the bucket slow and steady, testing the rope he'd set. It came up half full this time, muddy, but it held. He heard the horse before he saw her again. Didn't look up right away. Just set the bucket down, wiped his hands on a rag hanging from a nail by the post. "Water run this way?" she asked when she reached him. Her voice carried easy, like she wasn't asking a stranger on a piece of land most folks avoided. Levi pointed with his chin toward the ridge. "Spring line's up there. Used to feed this well. Ground shifted some years back." She nodded, eyes following the line he'd drawn without moving his feet. "Mind if I take a look?" He stepped aside. Didn't say yes. Didn't say no, that seemed to be enough. She walked the edge of the yard, boots brushing dry grass, stopping once to press her heel into the soil like she was testing it. The horse stayed where she'd left it, reins loose, head low. Levi watched her for a moment, then went back to the rope, pulled again. Water sloshed in the bucket this time. Not clean, but better. When she came back, she didn't ask more questions, just stood near the trough, looking at the water, then at his hands. "You'll get it to hold," she said. Levi shrugged once. "Ground's still here." She smiled a little at that. Not like it was clever, more like she'd been waiting to hear it. She left before the light dropped. No name, no reason given. Just rode out the way she came. The next time she brought coffee. 2 cups, wrapped in a cloth to keep them from spilling. One she held out without a word. Levi looked at it, then at her. "Didn't ask for it," he said. "No," she answered. "But you didn't say no either." He took it. The tin cup he used was dented along one side. Hers was cleaner. Porcelain, thin, with a small crack near the rim. He noticed it before he noticed the warmth. They stood by the fence, not facing each other, just drinking. Wind picked up across the valley, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain that hadn't come yet. "You fixing all this alone?" she asked after a while. "That's how it started." She nodded, like that made sense. Didn't press. When she left, she took the empty cup but left the cloth behind on the post. Levi found it later when the sun had already dropped, folded it once and set it on the crate by the door. By the second week, she came on Tuesdays, same time each visit. Late enough the heat had broken, early enough there was still light to see by. Sometimes she brought something broken. A loose stirrup strap, a buckle that wouldn't hold. Once just a length of rope with a knot tied wrong. Levi fixed each one the same way. Quick, clean, No extra talk. Sometimes she stayed after, sat on the step, watched him work, didn't ask him to explain. He got used to the sound of another set of boots on the boards, the shift of weight when she crossed one leg over the other, the way she held her hands around the cup like she wasn't in a hurry to leave. One morning before sunrise, Levi rode out to the far edge of his land and found the line of dry ground that cut toward Mrs. Ellery's place. Her well had gone bad weeks ago. Everyone knew it. He set a narrow trench by hand. Took him 2 nights and a morning. When water finally ran through, it was thin, uneven, but it reached her yard. He didn't go tell her. By the time Ava came that Tuesday, Mrs. Ellery's trough was half full. Ava didn't mention it, but when she looked at Levi that afternoon, there was something steadier in it, like she had put another piece into place. Word moved faster than rain in Red Ridge. By the end of the month, folks were talking again. Not about the land this time, about her. Graham Cole rode into town with a string of cattle and a clean shirt under his vest. Easy smile. The kind that carried across a room before he said a word. He stopped by the Whitaker place first. Next day, flowers showed up on the porch. Not wild ones. Ordered, wrapped proper. By Sunday, he was walking beside Ava outside the church, hat in hand, saying something that made her tilt her head just enough to listen. Levi saw it from across the street. He had come in for nails and a new hinge pin. Stood by the door of the general store while Dalton Reed talked to a rancher about a missing calf. Graham laughed at something. Ava answered, "Not loud, just enough." Levi looked once, then again. Then he turned back to the counter. "That him?" Dalton asked, not looking up. Levi set the coins down. "That's him." "Good man," Dalton said. "Steady. Folks trust him." Levi nodded. "He's a good man," he said. Outside, a wagon rolled past, wheels creaking against the dry boards of the road. Levi picked up the nails, turned to leave. His hand paused on the door. Just for a second. Then he stepped out into the light. That Tuesday, Ava came again. Same hour, same horse. She didn't bring anything this time. Just stood at the gate a moment, looking in like she always did, like she was measuring something that didn't show itself right away. Levi was at the workbench, shaping a new latch. The hammer struck clean. Once. Twice. She walked in without asking, set her gloves down on the crate by the door. He didn't stop working. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of metal carried out across the land that was starting, slowly, to answer back. Levi struck the latch once more, then set it aside. The metal cooled in the open air, ticking faint under the drop in heat. He didn't look at her right away. Ava sat on the step, hands resting loosely in her lap. No coffee this time. No rope. No broken thing to justify being there. Just her. "You didn't come to town Sunday," she said after a while. Levi wiped the edge of the bench with his rag. "Had work." "Church roof got fixed," she said. "They used your hinges." He gave a small nod. Didn't turn. "They hold?" he asked. "They hold." That was all. A wagon passed somewhere beyond the ridge. The sound came and went, like it had no reason to stay. Levi picked up another piece of iron, turned it once in his hand, set it down again. "You didn't bring anything today," he said. Ava glanced at the empty space beside her, where the cup usually sat. "No." He waited, like there might be more. There wasn't. "I just came," she added. Levi gave a quiet breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. "Place ain't much to come to." She looked out across the field. The fence line stood straighter now. The well bucket rested upright, water line dark along its rim. "It's changing," she said. He didn't answer that. By midweek, the town had decided. Graham Cole rode beside Ava down Main Street, easy in the saddle, talking like he'd known her years instead of days. He tipped his hat to folks by name. They answered back the same way. At the feed store, old Mr. Hanley leaned on the counter and said to no one in particular, "That one knows how to land on his feet." No one argued. Levi stood outside with a coil of wire over his shoulder, waiting his turn. He didn't step in. Didn't need to. From where he stood, he could see the reflection in the window. Graham leaning slightly toward her, saying something low. Ava listening, head tilted just enough to hear over the noise. Levi shifted the wire once on his shoulder. Then he turned away before they came out. That evening, Ava came later than usual. The sun had already dipped behind the ridge, leaving the yard in that thin gray light where things softened at the edges. Levi had finished for the day. Tools set in their places. Fire burned low. She stepped through the gate, slower this time. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. She paused at that. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Town's busy." "So is this place." He didn't argue that. She walked up to the step but didn't sit. Stood instead, hands loose at her sides. "He asked me to the winter social," she said. Levi reached for the canteen by the door. Took a drink. Didn't rush it. "That's so." "He'll ask proper before Christmas." Levi nodded once. "That's how it's done." Silence settled again. Ava watched him set the canteen back down. Watched the way his fingers lingered on the metal a second longer than needed. "You don't have anything to say about that?" she asked. He picked up a piece of wood from the pile, turned it, like he was checking for a split that wasn't there. "He's a good man," Levi said. There it was again. Same words. Same even tone. Ava's eyes stayed on him. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." She took a small step closer. Not enough to close the space. Just enough to change it. "And that's all that matters?" Levi set the wood down. Finally looked at her. For a second, it felt like something might move. Something might break loose. It didn't. "That's enough," he said. Ava held his gaze a moment longer. Then she nodded once, like she'd heard what she needed to hear. She turned toward the gate. "Don't," she said quietly, without looking back. Levi frowned slightly. "Don't what?" She stopped with one hand on the post. "Whatever you're about to decide," she said. "Don't." Then she walked out. No horse this time. She had left it tied just beyond the rise. Levi could hear the faint shift of hooves, then the soft creak of leather as she mounted. He stood there until the sound faded. The night before the social, Graham came by. No rush in his step, no edge to his voice. Levi was at the bench, finishing a set of straps he'd been mending. The lantern hung low, light steady. Graham took off his hat when he reached the door. Stood there a second, taking in the place. "You done good work here," he said. Levi kept his hands moving. "Work ain't done." Graham stepped inside anyway, picked up one of the straps, ran it through his fingers, checking the stitching. "Came to settle up," he said, setting coins on the table. Levi nodded, didn't count them. There was a pause. Then Graham spoke again, same easy tone. "I'll be asking Miss Whitaker proper tomorrow night." Levi tied off the thread, pulled it tight. "She deserves that," he said. Graham studied him a moment. Not unkind. "That she does." He set the strap down. "You and her," Graham began, then stopped. Shook his head slightly. "Well, doesn't matter." Levi didn't ask him to finish. Graham put his hat back on. "See you around." "Maybe." When he was gone, the place felt bigger again. Levi stood with his hands on the bench, looking at nothing in particular. The lantern flame flickered once. He reached out and turned it down. Next morning, he didn't set out the second cup, didn't leave space on the step. Worked straight through the hour she usually came. When the wind shifted, it carried a faint sound from town. Music, maybe. Hard to tell. Levi kept working. The hammer struck true. Again. Again. Like if he kept the rhythm steady enough, nothing else would break through. The hammer struck iron. Clean. Measured. The sound carried out across the land. Same as always. Then something else cut through it. Not loud at first. Just a shift. A different kind of movement in the distance. Levi paused mid-swing, head turning slightly toward the north ridge. The air felt wrong. By midday, the sky had turned a dull gray, heavy with a weight it hadn't carried in weeks. The wind came in low, pushing across the valley in uneven bursts. Then the rain started. Slow, then steady, then harder. Levi worked through it. He tied down what he could, pulled canvas over the tools, checked the fence posts twice. Water ran in thin lines along the ground, cutting shallow paths through the dust. By morning, the creek had changed. It wasn't a creek anymore. Word came fast. A boy on horseback, hat gone, shouting as he rode past the ridge. "North Dam's cracked!" Levi didn't wait for more. He grabbed the heavy pry bar leaning against the barn and a length of chain. No saddle. Just swung onto his horse and rode. By the time he reached the lower crossing, the water had already spilled over. Cattle were pressed tight against a broken stretch of fence, hooves slipping in the mud. A wagon had gone sideways near the bank, one wheel caught against a submerged beam. The horse pulling it was wild-eyed, jerking against the harness. Men were already there. Graham Cole stood knee-deep in water, rope in hand, calling out steady instructions. Two others worked beside him, trying to calm the animal, keep it from snapping a leg. "Easy now, easy," Graham's voice carried clear over the noise. It was the right approach, but it wasn't working. Levi slid off his horse without a word, took in the scene once. The wagon, the wheel, the way it sat too low, caught at an angle that wouldn't give. He stepped into the water. Cold hit first, sharp. Then the push of current against his legs. He moved forward anyway, gripping the pry bar in both hands. Graham saw him. "Wheel's stuck," he called. "We're trying to pull it free." Levi didn't answer. He went under. The water swallowed him up to the chest, then higher as he pushed toward the axle. Mud clouded everything. He reached by feel, fingers finding wood, then iron. There. The wheel wasn't just stuck. It was locked, wedged tight against the beam beneath it. Pulling wouldn't fix it. It had to be lifted. Levi braced the pry bar into the narrow gap, set his shoulder against it, pushed. Nothing. He shifted position. The current shoved him sideways, water pressing hard against his ribs. He dug his boots into the mud, set again, pushed. The iron bit into his palms through the gloves. He felt it. Didn't stop. Behind him, Graham held the rope tight, keeping the horse from thrashing loose. "Hold it!" someone shouted from the bank. Levi didn't look back. He pushed again. This time, something moved. Just a fraction. Enough. He reset the bar, drove it deeper into the gap, and threw his weight behind it. The beam shifted. The wheel broke free. The wagon lurched sideways, then straightened as the pressure released. The horse surged forward, scrambling toward higher ground, guided by the rope in Graham's hands. Voices rose, shouts, relief cutting through the rain. Levi let go of the bar. For a second, he just stood there, water rushing around him, breath coming slow and steady. Then he turned and made his way back to the bank. He climbed out without help. Sat down on the nearest rock, pulling off his gloves. The skin beneath was red, raw in places, lines where the iron had pressed too hard. The rain eased, The noise didn't. Men talked. Hands clapped shoulders. Someone laughed too loud. The kind that comes after something almost goes wrong. Levi didn't join it. He just looked at his hands. Then she was there. Ava moved through the crowd like it wasn't there at all. Didn't hurry. Didn't hesitate. Just came straight to him. She crouched down in front of him, close enough the noise faded a little. Her eyes dropped to his hands, took in every mark, every scrape. She didn't ask. She reached out and took them, careful, like she knew exactly where not to press. Levi started to say something. Didn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The creak ran behind them, louder now but steady. The worst of it had passed. Ava looked up at him. "I saw you," she said. Quiet. Meant for him alone. Levi held her gaze. The rest of the world kept moving. Voices, footsteps, the creak of the wagon being pulled free. But none of it reached where they were. Not quite. Levi felt her hands around his, steady and sure, like she wasn't surprised by what she had seen. That stayed with him longer than the cold water ever would. By the time he stood, the crowd had already begun to thin. Men led horses back toward the ridge. The wagon creaked its way onto solid ground. Someone clapped Graham on the shoulder, thanking him. Graham nodded, but his eyes had shifted. He looked once toward Levi, then toward Ava. That was enough. Morning came clear. The storm had passed, leaving the valley rinsed clean. The ground held moisture now. Dark lines where water had run. The well bucket at Levi's place filled faster than it had the day before. Levi was already at work when he heard boots on the boards behind him. He didn't turn. A moment passed. Then another. "I'm not going to ask her," Graham said. Levi kept his hands on the fence rail he was setting, pressed it into place, checked the line, adjusted it by a fraction. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." Graham stepped closer, looking out across the land. The straightened fence, the patched roof, the narrow cut of water running where it hadn't before. "She was watching you yesterday," he said. Levi didn't answer. "I saw her face," Graham went on. "Didn't look like someone deciding anything new." Levi set the hammer down, leaned his weight against the post. "She deserves a good life," he said. Graham gave a small breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. "That's what you keep telling yourself, isn't it?" Levi didn't respond to that. Graham reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn horseshoe, and set it on the workbench. "You fixed this for me," he said. "Didn't charge enough." Levi glanced at it. Wasn't much to fix. Graham nodded once. "That's the thing," he said. "You don't see it." He rested his hand briefly on the edge of the table, then stepped back. "I'm stepping aside," he said. "Not because I have to." Levi looked at him then. Graham met his gaze. "Because she already chose." The wind shifted across the valley, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. Graham tipped his hat and walked out the way he came. Levi stood there a while after he was gone. Then he picked up the horseshoe, turned it once in his hand, set it back down exactly where Graham had left it. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, white paint worn thin along the boards, windows open to let in the clean air after the storm. Levi had never been there. Not once. He stood outside the door longer than he needed to, hat in his hands, fingers pressing against the brim where the water had stained it darker. Inside he could hear movement. Papers shifting. A chair scraping lightly against the floor. He knocked. It sounded louder than it should have. A moment passed. Then the door opened. Ava stood there, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a piece of chalk dusted faint across her fingers. Her eyes dropped once to his hands. The bandage wrapped around the palm, tied tight but clean. Then she looked up at him. "Come in," she said. Levi stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of paper and wood, rows of desks, a chalkboard with half-erased words, sunlight coming in through the windows, cutting lines across the floor. He stopped near the center, didn't sit, didn't move much at all. "I've been thinking," he said. Ava closed the door behind him, leaned back against it slightly, waiting. Levi glanced down at the hat in his hands, turned at once. "I kept deciding for you," he said. Ava's eyes didn't leave him. He took a breath. "Figured what I had here wasn't enough. That you'd be better off with someone who could give you more. Easier. Cleaner." The words came slow, not practiced, just true. He looked up then. "I didn't ask what you wanted." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, just still. Ava pushed off the door and took a step forward. "Stop," she said. Not sharp, not raised, just certain. Levi's mouth closed. "You don't get to decide that," she went on. "Not for me." He held her gaze. For a moment, something shifted. Not outside, not in the room. Just there, between them. Ava took another step closer. Close enough now that he could see the faint line of dust along her sleeve, the way her fingers still carried a trace of chalk. "I've been coming out there for 3 months," she said. "You think that was by accident?" Levi let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ava reached out then, not to his hands this time, to the brim of his hat. She pushed it back just enough so she could see his eyes clearly. "I saw you," she said again. Same words, different place. Levi didn't look away. For once, he didn't step back from it. He leaned in. The kiss wasn't rushed, wasn't careful either. It just happened, like something that had been waiting long enough. When they pulled apart, the room stayed quiet. Sunlight still on the floor, chalk dust still in the air. Nothing had changed. And everything had. The next morning, there were 2 cups on the bench outside the ranch. One dented. One with a small crack along the rim. Levi stood by the fence, working a new rail into place. Ava sat on the step, papers in her lap, reading through a lesson while the coffee cooled between them. Neither of them spoke much. Didn't need to. At the far end of the pasture, a young calf found its footing in the softened ground. Took one unsteady step, then another. The land held. For the first time in a long while, it felt like it might keep holding. If you stood there long enough, boots in the dirt, wind moving slow across the valley, you might start to wonder what you would have done in his place. Would you have walked away before something good had the chance to take root? Or would you have stayed, even when it didn't make sense yet? Levi never saw himself the way the world saw men worth choosing. He saw the work, the dust, the long days that didn't promise much back. But Ava, she saw something quieter, something steady. The kind of man who fixes what's broken without asking to be noticed. And maybe that's the thing most folks miss. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loud. It doesn't come dressed in certainty or easy answers. Sometimes it sits beside you in silence, waiting for you to believe you're already enough. Not more. Not better, just enough. So if you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of something good, unsure if you belong there, maybe this is your reminder to stay a little longer. Tell me, have you ever almost walked away from something that mattered? There are more stories like this, quiet ones, strong ones, the kind that stay with you long after they end. If you felt something here today, you might find yourself right at home with the next one.